Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be your slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Well, this little light of mine, oh, well, I'm gonna let it shine. I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Jesus gave it to me. Oh, yeah, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, Jesus gave it to me. I'm gonna let it shine. Jesus gave it to me. Well, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. This little light of mine, well, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. People get ready, there's a train a-coming. You don't need no ticket, you just get on board. Well, faith is the key that keeps that diesel humming. You don't need no baggage, you just thank the Lord. Hey, people get ready, there's a train a-coming. You don't need no ticket, you just get on board. Hey, faith is the key that keeps that diesel humming. You don't need no baggage, you just thank the Lord. I believe, I believe, I truly believe.
Let's have another round of applause for Divine Praise. And that was a great way to start this program. My name is Beverly Watts. I'm the Executive Director for the Tennessee Human Rights Commission, and I want to say welcome to our celebration here in Nashville for International Human Rights Day. This is the day that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was created in 1948. This day has become our day here in Nashville for a time to reflect and look to the future. We also, during this event, honor those who have given a lifetime of service to making human rights a reality, those who have given outstanding service to forward the notion of human rights and to help create an environment for human rights, and then those who have chosen to make this their life's career or their life's mission at an earlier age, reminiscent of those civil rights workers who marched from First Baptist Capitol Hill. And that is really what we're here about and what we're doing here today. And it is really nice to be in the First Amendment Center, a place where we know that our dear friend is no longer here, but we know that his spirit is here with us, and that's John Siegenthaler. Well, my job is pretty simple today. I'm to keep the ball rolling, so that means I should be quiet. And I should bring up my colleague from the Metro Nashville Human Relations Commission, and that is Tom Negri, who's going to have some opening remarks.
Yay, thank you. Well, happy evening, folks. As Beverly said, wow, look where we are. And I'm so impressed that we are here today and seeing the crowd that we have here today. There was a time in my life that I thought that perhaps everyone would know and understand that human rights and why they were important and why they were so very important to us. And in today's day and age, December 10th, 2014, we have so many human rights and human relations issues. What's happened in Ferguson to Michael Brown, the shooting death in New York City with the chokehold death of Eric Garner. We have much to be said and more to be done. We have a lot of work to do and perhaps a little less to be said and more work to do. With the president's visit and with some of the signs I saw with the demonstrators yesterday entering the town hall meeting, many were expressing different thoughts as they were able to express their ideas on how they viewed human rights. I saw one sign that said, "Hi, I'm a white Southerner who supports Barack Obama." And I wouldn't have noticed. Yeah, I might have. Or deport those illegals and all those Muslims as well. We have work to do. But I do have a few shameless remarks on two people that are going to be honored tonight, because two of them asked questions of the president last night, and that's Avi Poster, Commissioner Avi Poster, over there, and my father, not really my father, my religious father, Father Joe Pat Brian. And both, if you haven't seen it yet, they asked some really fabulous questions. But with that said, I'm very pleased that we're here tonight, and as Beverly just mentioned, at the John Siegenthaler First Amendment Center. Thank you, Dolores, and for your entire team, the entire team here, for housing us this evening. We're recognizing 6 individuals who've really made it their life's work, or are beginning their life's work, in human rights and human relations, and what can be better said about that. So with that, we're going to move on with the program. Beverly, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. You will notice that the Tennessee Human Rights and Metro Nashville Human Relations Commission's name are at the top of the list of partners, but actually there are other partners, the Church of Scientology, the Muslim Women's Commission, and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and other organizations that we want to recognize, and I will probably throw in some others because we might have forgotten them. But the Planning Committee has been larger or smaller in many instances. but we consider all of you that because we hear from you when you come in and we hear what you say to us. Even if you aren't talking, we're listening. So we try to put together a program that is reflective of Nashville, its citizens, and where we are going as a community. We have 2 proclamations. We have a gubernatorial proclamation, which is being presented by State Senator Thelma Harper of the, is it the 19th? The 19th District for Tennessee. Yes, it's your time. And we're glad it's your time.
Thank you, Darling. Thank you so very much. It is so good to be here today. And I think you know that every time we come here, we think about John. We'll always love him. Today is a proclamation from the governor. The state of Tennessee, the proclamation by the governor. Whereas the United States plays a pivotal role in protecting human rights, and whereas respect for the basic human rights as important in fostering human dignity and freedom, and whereas the state of Tennessee and the Tennessee Human Rights Commission are proud of their commitment to all of the civil rights and the human rights for all residents, and whereas numerous community, civil, religious, and the other organizations that enable to equal the rights and protections for all individuals. Now, therefore, I, Bill Haslam, Governor of the state of Tennessee, do hereby proclaim December the 10th, 2014, the Human Rights Day in the state, and encourage all citizens to join all of us in observing this. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Senator Harper. And now I see Council Member Lonell Matthews, who has a proclamation from the mayor.
How is everyone doing this evening? We all breathe the same air, and we all call America home. And it's funny that we all don't share the same opportunities. And even though on paper, people may think we have equal rights, it's evident through Michael Brown's case and Eric Garner's case that we still have a lot of work to do. So as I prepare to read this proclamation that was prepared by the mayor, the 6th mayor of Nashville, Tennessee, I want you all to keep that in mind. Whereas the General Assembly of the United Nations approved the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on December 10th, 1948, declaring the recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. And whereas the Universal Declaration calls for all people and governments to promote and respect recognized rights while providing standards of achievement for governments throughout the world. And whereas each year the international community commemorates this event and recommits itself to the principles enshrined in the Universal Declaration. And whereas locally, numerous community, civic, religious, and nonprofit organizations work to ensure equal rights and protections for all residents. And whereas the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County shares the commitment of civil and human rights for all. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Carl F. Dean, Mayor of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County, do hereby encourage the citizens of Davidson County to join me in celebrating Human Rights Day. Signed, Mayor Carl Dean, and read by myself, Councilman Matthews. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Matthews. As we move on with the program, I know that there are a number of individuals in the organizations who are elected officials. Since we just heard from two, would anyone who's an elected official please stand up so we can just say thank you for being here? All right. Next is our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Dennis C. Dickerson. He is the James M. Lawson Jr. Professor of History, I believe that's right, isn't it? At Vanderbilt University. He has written numerous books, and before coming to Vanderbilt, Professor Dickerson taught at Williams College and was the Stanfield Professor of History, Chairman of the Department of History, and Chairman of the Afro-American Studies Program. He is the author of Out of the Crucible, Black Steel Workers in Western Pennsylvania, 1875 to 1980, Militant Mediator, Whitney M. Young, and African American Preachers and Politics, The Careys of Chicago. I want you to know I think we're in for a treat, so I am going to bring to the podium Dr. Dickerson.
Thank you, Ms. Watts, to this august assemblage and to the honorees. No Humans Left Behind, celebrating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. To Woodrow Wilson, credit belongs for spearheading the League of Nations, an international body that he hoped would affirm the rights of particular populations to self-determination. However liberal was this vision, his emphasis largely pertained to nation states. His contemporary, Mohandas K. Gandhi, however, while rebuking the nation state of Great Britain for its imperial intrusion upon the self-determination of the Indian peoples, also affirmed the principle of human rights and human dignity that hegemonic practice sometimes violently nullified. These precedents, reinforced by savage murder and genocide of whole groups of peoples because of religion, ethnicity, and nationality in World War II, lay behind the unprecedented Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The new United Nations that hope to end or at least ameliorate international conflicts at the same time set a global high bar for the observance of human rights and human dignity for people everywhere. In 30 articles, the Declaration reaffirmed that the United Nations would defend human rights in the dignity and worth of the human person and in the equal rights of men and women, and that these countries have determined to promote social progress and better standards of life and larger freedom. Article 1 says, for example, that all human beings are born free and equal in equal dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. Article 4 declares no one shall be held in slavery or servitude, and that the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their form. Article 5 says no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Article 12 says no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Article 18 affirms the right of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And Article 28 says everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized. This declaration, whether member nations of the UN adhere to its principles or not, morally required signatories to support its ideas and practices. They established a standard by which all nations would be judged in dealing with all populations, especially citizens living within their own borders. The Declaration, just as the Nuremberg trials between 1945 and 1949 that brought justice against Nazis who killed and persecuted Jews and other victims, and the assassination of Gandhi in 1948, focused international attention on what it means to be human and to be free, and what are the moral obligations of governments to those whom they govern. All movements to establish or enlarge the freedoms of those who were unfree drew upon the principles enunciated in the Declaration. Moreover, those deprived of their human rights could claim the UN as a venue where their grievances could be heard, and the weight of world opinion mobilized against offending nation states. African American leaders had long understood that their claims of freedom deprivations in the United States deserved a hearing in international forums. William Monroe Charter tried to do this in 1919 at the Versailles Peace Conference that produced the League of Nations. Religious intellectuals, Benjamin and Sadie Mays and Howard and Sue Bailey Thurman in the 1930s, and William Stewart Nelson and Blanche Wright Nelson in 1946 and 1947 sought the guidance of Gandhi about the use of nonviolence in black freedom struggles in the United States. The NAACP wrote a petition for the UN that outlined the plight of African Americans. Walter White, Mrs. Paul Robeson, and other African Americans traveled to San Francisco to witness the founding of this international body and endorse the principles of the Universal Declaration. Additionally, during the 1940s and 50s, because of the burgeoning civil rights movement, the United States Department of State and other agencies became increasingly sensitive about violations of black civil rights. American vulnerability to attacks from the Soviet Union about Jim Crow convinced some foreign policy officials to urge action and attention to the condition of black people. After all, the loyalties of emerging nations in Asia, Africa, and South America, many of them a part of the United Nations, were up for grabs in competition with the communist USSR. The Declaration became an indispensable resource in framing the principles and objectives of the civil rights movement and the legislation that grew out of it. Assertions about human rights, universally endorsed in an international document, provided assurances to civil rights advocates that their struggle enjoyed far greater support than they realized. The Montgomery bus boycott, the Little Rock school crisis, the Birmingham demonstrations, and the March on Washington received wide international notice. The fundamental principles that informed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 echoed the language in America's founding documents and reflected ideas later repeated in the Universal Declaration. The non-discrimination thrust of the 1964 law that rested on an equal rights doctrine and access to societal institutions, both public and private, gave breadth to this legislation. In areas not specifically covered by the law were still affected by shifts in public opinion and practice. Nowhere could discrimination and exclusion find justification either legally or morally in public accommodations or in private clubs. Equal rights, equal access, and equal treatment became standards that hardly any institution or individual could ignore. Implementation through such agencies as EEOC acted on legal grounds, and churches and higher education in the private sphere changed their behavior because of the moral momentum and not the threat of litigation. No one wanted to revisit the atrocities of genocide and acts of human depravity associated in World War II. These circumstances gave urgency to writing the Declaration, and this had the derivative effect of influencing the civil rights movement and the new laws that emerged out of it. Now that we look back over 50 years to the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and over 60 years since the ratification of the Universal Declaration, where do we stand? Astonishing progress of the public and private spheres where African Americans can partake of goods and services and lodging, travel, and leisure. Employment in once excluded venues, openings to occupations where blacks were either barred or in such small numbers that made the situation tantamount to exclusion. A substantial presence of students in higher education in unprecedented numbers and in unprecedented places. Placement in influential positions in philanthropy, corporations, government, and religious leadership that would have been unpredictable before 1964. The election of a U.S. president of African descent, once viewed as unattainable, today is a present reality. The civil rights movement, some of whose intellectual energy emanated from the Universal Declaration, helped to bring these developments to fruition. Freedom principles are activated only when they are sustained by ongoing movements aimed at broadening democracy. As the civil rights movement decelerated in the late 1960s, an era of conservative ascendancy unsympathetic to black advancement triumphed in 1980. The presidency of Ronald Reagan inaugurated an ungodly rise of the number of blacks plagued in the 80s and 90s with poverty, imprisonment, and the rise of pernicious stereotypes of the welfare queen and the frightful and menacing black man. In all of the rhetoric about the demonization of blackness, seldom have declaration principles been invoked to nullify these cultural, political, and economic developments. The coarseness of our politics also makes it difficult to discuss the Declaration without sounding hopelessly idealistic or out of touch with the facts of the real world. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is an underused resource. In our nation, we are engaged in a range of rights issues. The surveillance state in which we live, the criminalization of black men, our attitude toward the torture of suspected terrorists, voter suppression initiatives, and other civil liberties issues demonstrate how important declaration standards are. We also have our own Declaration of Independence, our Constitution with its precedent-setting Bill of Rights, and marathon efforts to enlarge democratic practice and several amendments, and such addenda documents as Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and FDR's Four Freedoms. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a derivative document, principally comes out of the American heritage of freedom. Our freedom practices, rhetoric, and ongoing efforts to enlarge democracy have become an international standard to which we ourselves must also adhere. The Declaration and its restatement of the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights should inform how we handle the multiple civil liberties issues that we now face. No matter how hard we try to separate ourselves from the founding themes of our nation, the United States is viewed as a city upon a hill, not because we are better than other peoples, we are not, but because we are obligated to reach for a higher standard of profession and practice in human rights. On what side should we be when balancing national security and personal privacy? Does torture exact seemingly justifiable means to get vital national security information over against our mandate to hold ourselves to higher standards of humanity? Do we really want the maximum number of people to vote, or are we obsessed with a range of IDs as the threshold to exercise the franchise? And what shall we do when we see younger black men, some of them children, like Trayvon Martin, 17, in Sanford, Florida, and Tamir Rice, 12, in Cleveland, Ohio, shot down in the streets in the absence of any crime and surely without no due process of law? The genius of the Declaration is that it derives from our American tradition of upholding civil liberties and compels us before the world to observe their high standards of human rights. We should not be frightened by the recent demonstrations by outraged citizens who lament the killing of young black men like Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Their legitimate concern about the cheapening of black lives actually points to a larger and laudable phenomenon. They are renewing democracy. Just as demonstrators, some in the city of Nashville over 50 years ago redeemed democracy through their fight against Jim Crow and pushing for the enactment of the 64 and 65 Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts. Present-day protesters marching nonviolently in Ferguson, New York City, and countless other cities are testing and expanding our democracy. Rights are not benevolently conferred, but they are granted only when people press for them and assert their right to have the declarations of 1776 and 1948 to apply to them. Standing for human rights in accordance with the Declaration are well-known persons who modeled courage in their advocacy of maximum human freedom. Gandhi, India's modern-day founding father, through grassroots mobilization and emphasizing spiritual discipline, showed his people how to oust colonial occupiers with the force of nonviolence. The many who emulated him applied his praxis and echoed and embodied Declaration principles in human rights movements in multiple places. In Nashville, they were beneficiaries and practitioners of Gandhian nonviolence and democratic ideas. Keller Miller Smith, a Baptist pastor, First Baptist Church honored tonight, and Andrew N. White, an AME denominational executive, were exposed to William Stewart Nelson, a Gandhi admirer who was dean of the School of Religion at Howard University, where the two earned their divinity degrees. James M. Lawson Jr., at the urging of Martin Luther King Jr., came to Nashville and as Southern Secretary for the Fellowship of Reconciliation, held with support from Smith and White nonviolent workshops with local students in preparation for a Nashville civil rights movement. Lawson, a Jesus follower and anti-militarist, was jailed because of his opposition to the Korean War and studied Gandhian nonviolence in India. His energized pedagogy in the Nashville Nonviolent Workshops trained students from several local institutions to desegregate downtown stores and to seed other civil rights groups, including SNCC and CORE. Lawson's expulsion from Vanderbilt Divinity School showed those who fought to expand human freedom sacrifice safety and comfort for causes bigger than themselves. Unsung activists, quiet and behind the scenes, witness for freedom in unpublicized places. Robert Cassie, another Nashville student, stepped onto the campus of Scarrett College as a reflection of what Lawson and others had done in activating students for the freedom cause. Herein lies our contemporary challenge as we celebrate International Human Rights Day and these honorees. We celebrate through an energized witness and by establishing a persistent presence that loudly declares democratic rights for all. Whether poor, homeless, newly arrived and undocumented, or anyone who is vulnerable and powerless, we must be their allies and advocates. The Universal Declaration of Rights, of Human Rights, protects all of us, whether comfortable or outcast, whether we are well connected to powerful institutions or subject to the vicissitudes of human existence. These rights are affirmed for us when we defend and promote the safety, welfare, and dignity of all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dickerson. It is always instructive to understand where we've been, to understand where we are going. And that's exactly what you've helped us to understand, whether it was internationally or whether it was the national civil rights movement here in this country. Where, after all, the universal human rights begins, Eleanor Roosevelt posed, in small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he or she lives in, the school or college they attend, the factory, farm, or office where they work. Or I guess now we talk about that place where we do the the internet and that kind of nebulous place where they may work. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seek equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen effort to uphold them close to home, we will look in vain for progress in the larger world. And I think that really is why we're here. It is really places close to home. And it is the people in our neighborhoods. It is the people that we're recognizing this evening who really bring human rights to life. It is each of us, and that is a challenge. If we listen to the questions and the history laid out by Dr. Dickerson, there's that unasked question: what will you do? And when will you do it? And that really is what we're talking about. For the people we're honoring tonight, they've answered the question, and they're doing the things that need to be done. So I'm pleased to present, I believe we have a video for all of the awardees, and bring my presenter up. That's what I need to do first. Let me bring up Lorraine Sokovia Paz, who has a presentation for the Human Rights Rising Advocate Awardee. Lorraine, how are you?
Good evening, everyone. Buenas noches. Buenas noches. I am very excited to be here today. Not only excited because of all these awardees, also because it's a very important day for us, for our country, for the city, and for the world. International Human Rights Day, it's crucial in our lives to remember and to constantly remind ourselves that we have to do things. Simple things can change the lives of everyone. I met Evan some time ago, I will say a year and a half ago, at a networking event. He looked like any of us. A young guy, handsome, smart, intelligent, and he looked to be very promising, something that is very important to me. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because to me, that means that anyone can be part of this cause, and everyone can contribute to have or make this world a better place for all of us. So yes, after some time now, we can see him here, and he is contributing in changing our city and adding a little bit of that grain that we all need to change our world. So if you would go ahead and show the video, please.
I'm Eben Cathy, and I work for the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. I think what motivates me is, Tennessee is my home, and Nashville's been my home for many years. This is where my family is from. I grew up here, and I left and came back because, I love this city and I love this state. I think about how this is my home, and I want it to be a place where, maybe I'll want to raise my kids one day. I think the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is an example that no matter where you are in the world, your community or your city or your state or your country can strive to meet those ideals. So it's a document that exists to set a standard. And I think everyone falls short of those standards that it lays forth. But it's something we can always be working towards. It's a goal that every country, every community should try to reach. The work that we do at Turk in the state legislature or in our local government or lobbying at the federal level are just some ways that little old us here in Nashville I think are making a difference in big ways. And it's not just us. I think there are a lot of organizations and people in Nashville and Tennessee who are doing amazing work. So I kind of credit my family and I credit the support system that I've had around me since I've lived here with helping me continue on this journey of being an advocate, of thinking about how we can build a stronger community. So I really look back to growing up in Smyrna, Tennessee, and thinking about the days when, talking with my family at the dinner table about what's right and what's wrong, and when it gets down to it, how, whenever we work towards living by our values. We're working towards a goal that I think is good for everybody and good for our community. The field of migration, or the field of diversity, is kind of a field that I see myself in for a long time. So I think it's one of the most interesting fields you can be in. And I think that there's an advocacy component. There's a component of building communities, and I think that's such a rich area to delve into to work on human rights issues, that I think I'll remain doing this kind of work for quite a while.
Beautiful. So, Kathy, well, you're going to be receiving the Human Rights Rising Advocate Award.
Thank you, Eben, for your work and for agreeing to continue to do it for a long time.
Yeah.
Next, I'm going to call up Veronica Marable Johnson, who is the president of the Nashville chapter of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, to present the next Rising Star Award, Rising Advocate Award. I'm going to give them new names.
It's okay.
Good evening. It is both an honor and it's a privilege to introduce a colleague, a friend, and one of Nashville's most promising community leaders, Ms. Denise Joseph, whose educational background in management and organizational development from Bethel University and McKenzie, Tennessee, were her foundation in community organizing, strategic planning, organizational development, program planning, small group dynamics, and nonprofit management was formed. Denise began her grassroots organizing career in 1999, working on issues like international trade, workers' rights, and living wages. Her key focus area, balancing the needs of all members of the community, with particular attention to marginalized populations of people. Denise is well known in Nashville's organizing community and has worked in collaboration extensively across organized labor, community, and religious organizations. She is currently the executive director of Organized Neighbors of Edge Hill, where her organizing efforts focus on healthy food access, education, crime, safety, and other issues as generated by the community. Denise has worked for many years in coalition with other organizations to build leadership from within communities of affected people. She has developed and offered various trainings on the basics of community organizing and other aspects of organizational development for social justice groups. In the spirit of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights promise to all, the economic, social, political, cultural, and civil rights that underpins a life free from want and fear. Please direct your attention to the screen as we learn a little bit more about my friend, Ms. Denise Joseph, one of today's rising advocates.
I began working in the social justice arena back in 1999, and I think one of my biggest motivations for caring about basic human rights is the fact that so often we disagree on political things, and we disagree on how our most vulnerable populations should be cared for by government, by community, by churches. I feel like the one common thing that we can all agree on is that everyone deserves a level of respect, and that their basic humanity is not only respected, but it's also protected. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a very important document because it serves as a guide. I think human rights is such a huge and lofty issue, and it has so many factors and components to it. If you don't have a good guiding document that all of us can look at, agree on, and make sure we're using to measure the work that we're doing, then you can really get lost in the weeds with an issue that's that big. So I firmly believe that it's very important so that we are all on the same page about what the goals are. We can change the world by thinking globally and acting locally. And so it's important to partner and to stay in the loop of organizations who are doing work around various human rights issues like sex trafficking, for instance, but also food equality and income equality. So I think partnering with those organizations, strengthening them, and making sure that we leverage power to change policies, not only citywide and statewide and federally, but also some global policy. Well, I just plan to stay the course. I think the best way for all of us to do that is to just continue and strengthen the work that we're doing and making sure that we're strengthening the work of others. You know, my focus has been greatly around income equality. It's been around wage indifference. It's been around food security. It's been around those types of things, but that doesn't mean that I don't also attempt to strengthen the work of people who are working on things like sex trafficking and other human rights issues.
I'm going to get up an extra step.
Thank you, Denise, for your service as well. Next will be Reverend Enoch Fuzz, who is the pastor of Corinthian Missionary Baptist Church, and he will be coming forward to make an award, Outstanding Service to Human Rights Award.
I have my timekeeper, Otto, my good friend. He's going to let me know when an hour is past. This is a great honor. You know, I don't go out much, really, and it's good to see so many friends and to have friends. To have people that you call friends, that you see around. They're not just the folk you know. But we spent long hours on the telephone back in the 70s, Senator Harper, haven't we? And Dwight, and, you know, and just to be friends. And here comes a person into the city who comes as a friendly person. If you want to have friends, you got to be a friend. Some people don't know how to do that. Just be a friend. If you want to be important, treat people like they are important. And the guy I'm telling you about tonight, he's always treated people as though they were important. He fluttered around you. He enjoyed people. He shared with people. And it didn't, listen, not many white folk come into the black community until they want something. Here's a guy who shows up in the community all the time. He's always smiling, and everybody is somebody. He's a person who's always busy. And the great people of our city, they're always busy. And they always have time for other people. The great people who we ought to celebrate on this day are those people who take time to say hello to somebody else. That's a measure to me, that you are not big yourself, but other people are. And I'm going to tell you, when you like Boy, I spent all this year trying to get your name right. Right. I want to say it. Where is he? When you're like Yuri Kunze, that means I've been saying it wrong for about 10 years, all right? When you're like Yuri, you are important. And you become important to people like me and to a whole lot of other people because you always treat people as though they are somebody. And if there's anyone in the room who haven't learned that lesson yet, on this day, everybody is somebody. Even the little fly that's lost in your house. Don't kill it, he's lost. Yuri Kunze, is there a video?
There is a video.
Yeah. Come on, watch this video. This is a stellar performance. There he is.
There was a point in my life that I realized that perhaps things could have been better or would have gone better if I was to have more friends, more people that could guide someone's path. And I guess we learn from our mistakes and we learn from our lack of knowledge, I guess, growing up. So when I came to the United States, I realized that maybe mine was a more privileged life than others. And I felt that it was a moral duty, beyond anything, to step up and be a friend to someone else that may need it. The world is everywhere, so we're part of a global community no matter where we are. And I believe that what you do in your local community can have an impact across the globe. Now, the days we live in with social media, with the internet, things can be known and we can learn from models that are successful in making a world a better world, a more peaceful world, a more integrated world, a world where justice is truly for all. Here from Nashville, we can set an example of how to resolve things in peaceful ways, how to foster integration, how to foster respect. And it will take collaboration. It will take people identifying a higher priority, which is one that has to do with everyone else around us, and build a community that can be an example to other communities and create that domino effect. At least I hope for that. We are all agents of change. You just have to believe in that. And I think there is greater good that can come from you being the one making a difference, instead of putting that mission in the hands of groups, organizations, or others, because the neighbor is the one that is near you and close to you, and that's how you make an impact. I am very honored and humble at this recognition. I feel this way because all the things that I've done it in an organic way. It's how I felt it. And it really moves me because I wish we could do more. And I want to share it with others. Not because it brings me more, but it makes me more courageous so I can fight the fight that needs to be fought. It is not an easy thing to do. Many times it's a lonely fight for what you feel it's right. And I think we all have inside of us that sense of what is right, what is fair. And I guess that's how we were born with. And I guess the sense of having the universal rights, human rights, comes from that as well, because it belongs to us, it's inside of us. And it is not easy to engage sometimes the support for doing what is right. And many things are moved by interest and sometimes politics. And I wish we don't have to have that, because those that are in need to have a brother or a sister with them, a friend, cannot wait. sometimes when we are ready, if the system is ready, it's too late. So I encourage everyone to take action now. If you know of something that is wrong, do something about it. Don't wait that someone else is going to do it for you. Because I can attest that I have been able to do things just because I wanted to do them badly, and good things for others. And I know we can all do that.
You know, your video took up a lot of my time.
So there.
Thank you, Yuri, for what you do. And thank you, Reverend Fuzz, for relinquishing part of your hour. Absolutely. It's my privilege now we have a second Outstanding Service Award, and that is going to be presented by Aisha Labahala, who is chair of the Muslims Women's Council. And a new commissioner for Metro Human Relations Commission.
Good evening. I'm Aisha Labahala, and I'm pleased to present a well-deserved Outstanding Service Award to Mr. Avi Poster. Reading Mr. Poster's bio was very inspiring because he has devoted so much of his time to advocating for others. Mr. Poster moved here to Nashville in 2001 following a 34-year career as a public school administrator and national educational consultant. During his professional career, Avi was primarily known for his focus and interest in middle school best practices, social-emotional learning, and organizational culture. 3 schools Avi served as principal were awarded the prestigious U.S. Department of Education's Blue Ribbon Award by 3 different presidents. Avi's community service in Nashville has centered on advancing public school education. He served 4 terms as chair of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce Citizens Panel for a Community Report Card, 6 years as a member of the Charter School Review Committee, 5 years as chair of the Metro Nashville Public School Family Advisory Council, for special education. Avi devotes a lot of his time to various community services. He serves as chair of the Rochelle Center for Adults with Developmental Disabilities, the Coalition for Education About Immigration, Clergy for Tolerance, the Muslim Jewish Circle of Friends, and a Voice for Poverty Reduction. He is a member of several boards: the Nashville Human Rights Commission, Community Nashville, W.O. Smith Music School, Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, Nashville for All of Us, and the Community Relations Committee of the Jewish Federation. Avi continues to be engaged as an educational consultant. He is president of the Chai Kuz Music Publishing and a principal partner in EduCharacters, a multimedia company that develops character educational programs and commercial educational vehicles, including movies, televisions, and books. Please turn to the screen for a few words from Avi.
If you're asking where did my commitment to justice come from, it's not all altruistic, I have to tell you that. It's not all because of wanting to do good for others. It's a wonderful, healthy place to be, surrounded by people who are good-hearted and do justice work. I don't golf, I don't drink, I don't carouse. And in order to make new friends, you have to seek out people who share similar values if you want those friendships to endure. And so doing justice work has brought me a great deal of personal satisfaction, and joy. Ever since I was a young boy and was fortunate enough to be shown the Declaration of Universal Human Rights, my response has been the same. It's an aspirational document. It's a beautifully written document. It sets an ethos for the world to act around. It serves as a blueprint for all of us to move forward. I find it uplifting. I find it encouraging. It helps fill my glass when it feels empty. If I had any wish, it would be those that we elect. Imagine if our mayors woke up every morning and read the Declaration of Rights. Imagine if when they called department meetings, if they went over that declaration to ask each department how their work activates around those rights. It simply is a beautifully written piece that gives me hope for the world ahead. Nashville has the potential to be the epicenter of justice work in the South, if not in this country. We are blessed with just a depth of good people willing to roll up their sleeves and not just talk about what should be, but act on what they think should be and make it actually happen. This town is filled with good people. And the beauty of a town our size is that we're big enough to be considered one of the big cities, but we're still small, and we don't work in silos. We collaborate with each other, we sit at each other's tables, we give each other strength by supporting each other and helping each other, and that network gives us a power that larger communities that work in silos that don't interact with each other, don't enjoy. This is an interesting city. I think while we grow economically and socially, we have a chance to grow ethically. And I have great hope that Nashville will be the star in the sky that everyone looks up to. One of our obligations as world citizens is not just to look at what's around us, but to at least step forward to be a part of making things better. Some of us are more inclined to act out. But what I think is an absolute, absolutely within the range of all of us is to use our voice. While some may act out more intentionally and more aggressively, all of us are capable of saying aloud what we think ought to be and what we think is wrong about what we see in this world. And we can do that in conversation with others. We can do that conversations at our dinner tables with our children. We can do that in our places of worship and work. We can also pick up the pen and use it in our writing. Not all of us have to sit at boardroom tables, but all of us have the obligation to speak up to what we see that's wrong in this world. And the gift of voice is ours. The Declaration of Human Rights guarantees us the right to use our voice, and that's one thing we ought to be doing. So right now I have the gift of time, and I choose to do this work both for the right reasons and altruistically, but also for the personal satisfaction it gives me. Beats golf.
Please give a warm welcome to our 2014 Outstanding Service recipient, Avi Poster.
That's a photo.
Thank you, Avi. I think at one point Avi had me at a meeting every morning, and it was a different group. And that means he really has a lot of time, and he really puts in the time as well. We also know now this is his way to get high. Since you don't play golf, this is your way to get high. All right. And we thank you for that, because we're better for it. We're going to pause from current awardees to recognize two outstanding individuals. And to do that, and to do a special tribute, we're asking Dwight Lewis to come forward. Dwight is the former editorial editor of the Tennessean and author and a longtime friend of both of the gentlemen, and I happen to know him too and call him friend. Dwight.
Thank you, Beverly. Thank you very, very much. And let me, too, congratulate the honorees at tonight's program. Thank you for what you have done in the area of human and civil rights. If I could, for a moment, let me ask Mrs. Dolores Siegenthaler if you would stand for a moment, please. Bob Siegenthaler, John's brother and his sister, would you all stand just for a second, please? And if there are any members of the George Barrett family, would you please stand? Okay. When I received a telephone call from Beverly Watts informing me of plans to honor the memory of John Siegenthaler and George Barrett during this celebration, I got excited. I got more excited and felt honored a short time later when Beverly wanted to know if I would be willing to share my reflections about those two unique humanitarians, George Barrett, a lawyer, John Siegenthaler, a journalist, both of whom were strong civil rights advocates. Not long after talking to Beverly, I made a telephone call to Lucius Outlaw, professor of philosophy here at Vanderbilt. I wanted to see if there was a way of having Lucius's recently mounted photo exhibit of John Siegenthaler on display here tonight. Over the past 10 years, Lucius took a number of photographs of John Siegenthaler in different settings. After John's transition in July, Lucius put some of those photographs into a great collection that first went on exhibit at the Bishop Joseph Johnson Black Cultural Center here on the Vanderbilt campus. They've been shown elsewhere, and we were hoping that they could be shown tonight. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But shortly after the first of the year, they will be on display here, and I urge you to come back and take a look. There's an old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I am sure when you see the exhibit, you will agree with those photos. Those photos do represent 1,000 words. And then when you see the photograph of John Siegenthaler and George Barrett together, it'd be like 5,000 words or more. When John Siegenthaler left us fiscally in July, one of the many people who traveled back to Nashville for his homegoing services was Marcia Vandenberg, a graduate of Vanderbilt University and a former federal court reporter for the Tennessean, as well as city editor. Marcia came back to Nashville from San Francisco, in part because of her admiration and appreciation for John, that crusading newspaper editor that she and many others have called him. During her time in Nashville in July, Marcia also had a chance to share a few moments with George Barrett, whom she also respected and admired deeply. That was before George made his transition this past August from his home here on earth, from his earthly home to his heavenly home. Marcia was covering the federal court beat for the Tennessean in 1977 when George Barrett was in U.S. District Judge Frank Gray's courtroom ordering the landmark lawsuit of Rita Geyer Sanders versus the state of Tennessee's segregated higher education system. In paying tribute to these very good friends, we are also acknowledging a rare breed of synergy that happened. Engaging time, place, and professionalism. Marsha wrote in an email to me after I told her of my task tonight. That synergy was born of a friendship that was long-standing. And with that friendship, a mutual respect and common purpose when it came to wielding the professional tools each had in hand to right the injustices of both blatant and subtle discrimination. Marsha added in her note to me that before moving to California a number of years ago now, she had a conversation with George Barrett after bumping into him at a restaurant on 21st Avenue South. Do good, George admonished her. Do good, don't forget your roots. Marsha said she has not, and she was thankful that you all are having this celebration tonight. George Barrett was like that. He let you know how he felt and exactly what he thought. I remember writing an op-ed column for the Tennessean back in April 2004 about a unique gift I had received from a friend who found it while antiquing. The gift was a Wednesday, April 12th, 1967 edition of the Nashville Tennessean wrapped in plastic. Racial strife bomb eases campuses was the headline on the front page story that April 12th. Another front page headline read, Negro students hurl charges that Nashville was a city sick with segregation. George Barrett was one of 3 people I called in April 2004 to find out if they thought Nashville was a better city 37 years after rioting had occurred here in 1967. Certainly we've come a long way, said George, who grew up here and in the early 1960s became the first white lawyer to hire a black lawyer in his firm. We've erased the legal barriers to racial segregation, but we haven't erased the economic barriers and many of the intellectual barriers. I still think racial discrimination has got to be dealt with in economic terms. We've got to raise the economic level of the African American community and close that gap. It means more money for education, more focus on education, and unfortunately, now we are talking about the budget crisis in public education. If he walked in here right now, I am sure George Barrett would boldly say the same thing holds true today. And then there's John Siegenthaler, who is your friend, as your colleague, even as your boss, would be there with you in the good times as well as the difficult times. As I was preparing to come here tonight, I ran across a tape at home of a speech John gave 10 years ago at a luncheon at the Frisch Center sponsored by the Tennessee Board of Regents. Remember 10 years ago, in 2004, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. You know, 50 years has passed, and as I look around this room, it seems to me that the first appropriate thing to say as a reminder is that when that case came down, we could not have met here or anywhere as we are without violating local ordinance, state statute, federal policy, the mandate of the United States Supreme Court, all of which was enforced by racist segregation and segregated society, all of which was enforced by the fear of our own indigenous terrorist organization, the Ku Klux Klan. John said that day as his good friend George Barrett sat nearby. And you know, he added, that's something to think about. 50 years has flown by so fast, and we forget so easily that in this city, the border of the Mid-South, we were as separated by race as any city in South Africa at the height of apartheid. Any place any person of color needed to go or wanted to go was denied by ordinance, statute, mandate, public policy. Hospitals, hotels, restrooms, public parks, motels, public accommodations, bathrooms. The law was there. Go to the state courthouse or to the federal courthouse, and those demeaning signs were there. Separated us even at the water fountain. If John Siegenthaler were here tonight, he could almost give that same speech he gave in 2004 about the promise still to be kept, not only in Brown versus Board of Education, but also with the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. And before John could sit down, he would have to tell you that personal story that he told so often about his grandson, Jack. Many of you have heard it before, but it's a story that you don't ever mind hearing once again. Remember, it's a story about John and Mrs. Siegenthaler had gone to Connecticut to visit their daughter-in-law, their son, John Michael, and their grandson, Jack. And John always liked to read a story to Jack before Jack fell off to sleep. But this particular night, John Michael came in to the room, and he told his daddy and his grandson, and his son, only one story tonight. It was around Thanksgiving. Only one story tonight. Only one story tonight. We have things to do tomorrow, a lot of things to do, and we have to get up early. So John told Jack, he would only read one story, and he read a chapter from Harry Potter. But Jack said, well, Dad said you could only read one story, but you could tell me a story. And then this is how the conversation went between John Siegenthaler and his grandson, Jack. So I read one chapter of Harry Potter, after which, so I read one story of Harry Potter, after which Jack said, Dad said you could only read one story, but you could tell me another story. I said, fine, Jack. What would you like for me to tell you? He said, I would like for you to tell me the story about when you were in Montgomery, Alabama, and were hurt. A 5-year-old wants to know about that, and I'm puzzled. I said, Jack, what do you know about that? Well, he said, Dad and Mom and I watched a documentary, and I asked about it, and they told me sometime to ask you. And I said, Jack, it's a quick story. In Montgomery, Alabama, and in many other places, there were angry, hostile, mean white people who did not want black people to ride the bus. And the young white students, the young black students, decided they were going to ride the bus. And they did ride the bus. And the mean, angry, hostile white people beat them up. And I tried to help them, and they beat me up. And they went to the hospital, and I went to the hospital. But we weren't there alone. We got well. And it's a story with a happy ending, Jack, because then everybody was able to ride the bus. And there's a pause. And Jack says, Gran, are you black? Think of that from a 5-year-old child. Gran, are you black? It took my breath away. My first thought was I have betrayed my daughter-in-law, who told me this was not going to come up until he raised it. And I raised it. And quickly I said, you know, Jack, it doesn't really matter, does it? And I don't know what he thought. He said no and went to sleep. And I came home, came back to Tennessee. And I wrote him a letter, and I recounted what I had said and what he had said. And in the letter, I said, someday you'll read this and you will understand. What you read is that I said it didn't really matter, but it really does. Jack, it still matters. It still matters. I said, I am a 75-year-old. I am 75 and you are 5. By the time you're 75, perhaps it won't matter. But it still matters now. And it does still matter. On the other hand, I would have to say, looking at all of us here today, together today, celebrating Brown 50 years later, and we can substitute that for the Civil Rights Bill of 64 50 years later. Remembering those of you who are educators, teaching young minds to remember, it may not happen. Jack may not have to wait until he's 75 before it no longer matters. The last time Martin Luther King spoke at Vanderbilt University, he said something that I think, celebrating Brown, we should all remember. He looked out over that memorial gym which was packed and said, to those of you who are white and would like to join us, but because of personal problems or political problems or social problems or economic problems, cannot, let me tell you, we will liberate you. And you know, he did. And the children did. The children who sat in downtown here in Nashville, the children who were Freedom Riders. And we're a better society for it. Yes, we are indeed a better society than we were 50 years ago when the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 was passed. We are a better society too because of strong civil rights advocates such as John Siegenthaler and George Barrett. I thank God for them, and I hope you enjoyed the video that we're about to see from the Tennessee Commission on Human Rights. Thank you very much.
Gentleman called and he said just what Rip said. Who the hell is Diane Nash? She is starting a new wave of freedom rides coming down from your hometown. Do you know her? And I said, well, I covered the sit-ins and yeah, I know her casually, but well, call her and tell her to stop this. Tell her what you've seen. Tell her what you've seen. These young people, their colleagues from all over the country have been blasted by violent Klansmen. Tell her she must not do this. And I'm wondering, do I really know her well enough to... Well, I thought, you know, I do have a friend who knows her and who represented her and the other Freedom Riders. George Barrett was my high school classmate. George is sitting back there. You all can look at George and tell he's a lot older than I am, but we're...
Where are you, George? Raise your hand for us, will you? Thank you.
But we were in the same class. I think they held him back a few years earlier. But anyway, I called him, and he called Diane and told her that I would call. And it was a very tense conversation. And I said, you just can't do this. And I can think back sitting here and listen as I recount that conversation. And I can hear my voice go up a decibel, up a decibel, up a decibel, to that point where almost shouting, young woman, do you understand you're going to get somebody killed? I mean, her voice doesn't go up a single decibel. And she says quietly but firmly, sir, you don't understand. You don't understand. We all signed our last wills and testimony last night. We know someone will die.
And the lawsuit styled Rita Sanders versus, at that time, Buford Elton was governor. I've sued every governor since I've had a law license. Rita Sanders versus the governor. It was the first suit. It was filed on May 15, 1968, 15 years after Brown versus the board. It refocused on higher education, where Brown versus the board was elementary and secondary education. And we sued the Board of Regents, the governor, the Board of Trustees of the University of Tennessee, and the Commission of Education. And the first time one whole state system of public higher education was subject to litigation. And that began the long struggle which has resulted in this campus today, the physical facilities and the improvements in this campus. So my association and concern for TSU goes back to the early 60s.
As an organization, the Tennessee Human Rights Commission recognizes the foundation on which we stand. Both George Barrett and John Sigenthaler were part of our 50th anniversary celebration, and this is a part of the video. George, I was last with probably November of last year, and we were at Fisk University talking to students. And last January, I had the privilege of hearing John Sigenthaler give a speech at the Martin Luther King Commission in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I walked up to him at the end. I said, John, this is the best speech I've ever heard you give. And at that point, I'd heard a lot of speeches given by John. He was as succinct and as on point as he could be. But that is his legacy, is that he has given us some roadmaps of his thoughts, his commitment, as did George. And that is the memory I think we have for both of them. So let's just take a moment of silence for two great men whose physical presence is not with us, but whose legacy lives on through our actions. Thank you. Thank you, Dwight. Next, I am going to call, it looks like Tom Negri, to the podium to make a presentation for a Lifetime Achievement Award. Tom?
Well, thank you, Beverly. Now that I'm in tears, wow, that was very moving, and I really am in tears, so forgive me, because I'm going to change my remarks a little bit. I have the great opportunity in introducing Father Joe Pat Brean for a Lifetime Achievement Award, and I just want to start that it's kind of remarkable that all three gentlemen went to the same high school, that being Father Ryan. And I really wasn't aware of that, and knowing that George and John died in the same year, and you take a look at, and I really do think George looked older than John, you know, and Joe Pat is much younger. We all know that. Yes. But what a legacy. But some of the same human rights, civil rights issues, all three of them have conquered. And just to go through a few of those, and I will in a moment when I look at my notes, but it's probably every other week for the last 2 years I get a call from Father Brean saying, you know, Tom, I think now's the time we ought to address that driver's license issue for those undocumented people. We shouldn't have taken away those driver's licenses. And he is so right. When we look at what our state did, when we used to know where those undocumented people were, and we knew they had a driver's license, and we knew they knew the rules of the road, then we took them away to make our state safer, which we didn't do, and we all know we didn't do, and they still don't have the opportunity to drive. And then I started getting calls from Father Brean who said, you know, Tom, we have to do something about in-state tuition for those undocumented folks who now can attend high school, who can graduate, but can't get jobs and can't get a higher education. And if you're a U.S. citizen in the state of Tennessee, if you're a U.S.-born child in the U.S., in the state of Tennessee, of two undocumented parents, you cannot get in-state tuition. Well, by golly, we got to change that, Tom. And he's absolutely right. And Father, we hope that perhaps this year we can change that. Because it seems like everybody that went to Father Ryan likes to sue people. No? But Father Brean has been a priest for some 53 years and continues to set the example for other priests and religious leaders to follow. Born in a family of some 9 children, you were Catholic. Little humor there. Oh, there you go. Born in a family of 9 children, he would take a leadership role at an early age. Whether it's assisting the homeless or less fortunate, to speaking on church issues, Father Brian is always thoughtful and knowledgeable about the subjects he addresses, whether you agree with him or not. And at times, there are many who didn't agree with him. I wasn't one of them, and I'm not one of them. I ran across a couple of difficult situations, and I'll address one here, where I had a young lady and her partner. The partner passed away via suicide because her partner was dying of cancer and she didn't want to go first. She wanted to go first. And she needed a funeral. And many religious organizations refused to do it, so I called Father Joe Patton. It was amazing. The families didn't talk, and prior to the funeral, he had the families get up and trade places so that they could finally meet one another after 18 years. It was spectacular and something I'll remember for the rest of my life. In 2007, Father helped launch Our Lady of Guadalupe Catholic Church on Nolensville Road. That has now become one of the largest Latino churches of any denomination in our state and beyond. Kind of interesting about that church, they all started where all the masses were in Spanish. It's interesting, though, that the children now are speaking English, and they just started masses in English. Isn't that the way it happens? He's always been there in support of not only his congregation, but the entire city of Nashville, the state of Tennessee, and our country. He supports human rights, comprehensive immigration reform, and would help anybody who needed help, both documented, undocumented, black, white, or other. With that said, I'd like to show you the video and have it speak for itself.
My mother and dad were great teachers, not with books, but as far as life, caring about people. Grew up in a neighborhood that was, looking back, I was very fortunate. We were, in those 4 or 5 blocks, we were about the only Catholic family. You had all different religions, and you grow up with an appreciation for whoever you are. And we were lucky that way because some of those guys that I grew up with, Methodists, Baptists, Jewish, we still know and like and get along, get with each other every so often. As you know yourself, the things you stand up for, you don't always win, and you don't always at that time find success. But if it's something that's right, good, true, and beautiful, it will eventually become that way. Over the years, I've been reprimanded, by 3 different bishops. And each time it was the fact that I spoke out on what I thought was true and good for the church. Spoke out in favor of freedom of conscience, the dignity of every person, the goodness and so forth of homosexuals, and for the needs of the church, the need to have a married clergy, and also to have at least some ordination for women. And that was in the past when we had different popes. And now we have a pope that is more radical than I ever was. What he says and what he thinks is what the church should do and how we should treat each other. I mean, he even went so far as to say that the different Christian people. It's a scandal. We should all be able to join together at the one table of the Lord and share in the one Eucharist as a sign of our bonding with Christ. He also goes ahead and says, you know, same-sex marriage, a number of other things that been condemned and all that. It's all on the table. Let us be open to see what is true and good. So my only complaint is he should have come 30 years ago. Pope Francis is just a bright light, and he is certainly encouraging. And I hope to somehow, in a small way, make his message known, because it's pretty much what the people already believe, the laity. They're all, the majority, you know, in favor of what he's saying. But we have bishops that are very rigid, not related to the people very well. So these are exciting times. And hopefully as time goes on, the conservatives can see what good things that Pope Francis is doing. And I hope to be a small part of that. I'm not retired from the ministry.
No, he isn't. Before Father Joe Pat comes up, could the family and friends of Father Joe Pat stand, please? Yay. It's a foot order.
Thank you, Father Breen, for your service and for your prayers.
Can I say just 5 words?
Come up.
Just not only the great influence in my life was my mother and father, but the great influence, one of my strongest advocates and one of my strongest critics was my brother, Father Phil Breen. It's made a difference, and I want you to be aware of that.
Thank you. Well, I'm pleased to present the Lifetime Achievement Award to the First Baptist Capitol Hill, another institution in this city. Before I do that, I want to recognize 2 former honorees who happen to be members of that church. One is Carrie Gentry, Mrs. Gentry, and Mrs. Inez Crutchfield. There they are. And they are former honorees, having received the awards themselves. And in and of themselves, they have a history, but it's a history tied to the church and to the beliefs that they carry. I've known Mrs. Crutchfield for a few minutes, as well as Mrs. Gentry. I won't talk about how many. How about that? And these are ladies that I love and adore and who have always been my models, and I thank you for that. The First Baptist Capitol Hill sat on the corner of 8th and Charlotte for a long time. And I left Nashville and came back, where's the church? I was not a member, but it was there. But there's a marker on that corner. It has a distinctive history. It will be 150 years old in 2015. And it has an advocate history from day one. And if you read the history of the church, you will find that pastors and members alike took up the notion that yes, they were a church saving souls, but they were going to save Nashville too. And it is those actions I think you see. It was the center of the movement in Nashville, the student sit-in movement. Reverend Kelly Miller Smith Sr., every evening, my father would watch the news at 5:30, and I am a Nashvilleian. I was born at Hubbard Hospital. I tell you, that's how much of a Nashvilleian I am. And he would say, be quiet, they're talking about Reverend Smith, and I gotta hear it. And it was something, because Reverend Smith was thought of as a man of high stature in communities all over this town. And when his name came up, people would stop because they wanted to know what he was doing, because what he was doing was right, and they wanted to know that. And then he was so concerned, he sent his children, and his daughter Joy was one of the first students to desegregate schools in this town. So it didn't start with the student movement, it goes into the 50s, and leaders before at that church had done that. So with that little background, because the history is in your program, let's show the video and hear some remarks, I believe, from the pastor.
Nashville has become a city with great potential. It has been a city that seems to have all of the elements, or many elements, that have come together in a very strong, a very positive way that can allow it to be the kind of beacon it needs to be, not only for the city itself, but also for the state and perhaps even for the nation. There's a good blend of people, there's a good blend of culture, there's a good blend of things that attract and appeal to people. And so I say that to say that therefore there are persons who would have a different kind of sensitivity and that are here that can seek to make a difference. As a matter of fact, Nashville has played that role again during the 60s when there were concerns about what's going to happen on the national front. There was concern as to whether the nation really was a powder keg that was going to explode. And Martin Luther King Jr. Saw how Nashville handled things. And when Nashville handled things right, he wrote, and it's been documented in several different places, he wrote how much he appreciated the way Nashville handled things. And I think Nashville, again, can handle things in such a way that become a model for the rest of the nation. And we here in Nashville and in the nation need to understand that we need to just try to make a difference in the place where we find ourselves, whatever corner, whatever place it might be, that we're trying to make a difference there. Oftentimes I hear people talk about the fact, well, where is the civil rights movement now? The reality of it is still going on. It goes on in terms of what has happened here in the city of Nashville with the Human Rights Commission. It's going on in terms of the state of Tennessee and other places. It just doesn't have all of the big events, and not everything can be big events. As a matter of fact, even the movement of the 60s was not about a whole lot of big events. It's about a lot of little events that they understood and put in a capsule together in terms of understanding. So we must understand that big events don't always happen. You're not going to have the marches on Washington, but you're going to have where there'll be those who will speak out against discrimination. There'll be those who will speak out against racism, sexism, and other kinds of isms that seem to afflict and affect our society. They just need to do whatever they can whenever they see that there is an injustice that is being done. I think that First Baptist is always honored when people are acknowledging and recognizing the things that it has done historically. The thing that we pride ourselves on is that we did not set out to make history. We did not set out to be the ones that can be recognized. We just did what we thought needed to be done. And the church building in and of itself has always been strategically located, whereby it can address not only things that are going on in the community, but things that are happening downtown as well. And so I think that geographically it made a difference. In terms of personalities with not only my father, but many other persons who have been a part of the congregation, there have been those who've had the kind of consciousness and sensitivity to be able to know that these injustices have to be addressed, because if we don't do it, then who will? And particularly those persons who are in the social and political positions to be able to have a voice and to make a difference there, and also professionally, lawyers who volunteer their times, others who would go and pick up demonstrators and bring them back and forth, not only from jail, but also from other places that may be hostile environments and places that, but that's just the kind of thing that we did. Not trying to make sure our flag was seen, but really just trying to do what it is that we felt was necessary to be done. And so we're grateful that that we were able to do that, not because we're looking to make a name for ourselves, but because we believe that's what we were called to do. And we appreciate the fact that there are those who still see the value of what we have done and the things that we are looking to do in the days that are ahead.
I would like to bring up the Associate Pastor, Reverend Arnold Morton, who is going to accept the award. And yes, that was Reverend Kelly Miller Smith Sr.'s son, who is now the current pastor. Well, we have almost come to the end of the program. We only have just a few more things. So I get a few closing remarks, like you've not heard enough yet. But I think the challenge for us is, where do we go from here? And that was the question that Martin Luther King posed in his last book, Chaos or Community? Where do we go from here? And it is a challenge I think we must all undertake. If Ferguson is to be, if Michael Brown's death is to be a legacy of where we go from here, the question is, what do we do? Is the legacy going to be looting and whatever, or is the legacy in Nashville going to be working together to make sure we're not a Ferguson? Chief Anderson came by earlier but had another commitment. So the question is, what can we do, and how can we work with the police in Nashville to make sure that we're not Ferguson? But what can we do with the public schools? What can we do in health care? What can we do to better our communities? What can we do about poverty? What can we do about a number of things in this community? There's more work to be done than there are probably people that can do it. But working together, as is noted by a number of the speakers, it's the right thing to do if we're going to build a world-class community. If we want to be the IT city, that's what they call us. Right. The IT city, I think, is one that adheres to the principle of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And for those of us in this room, if we become the orators, and we become those who will go out and save other souls under that umbrella and bring them in, excuse me, Father, I had a Baptist in the family as a minister. But if we do that and really look at that and live that daily, we become models and examples for others. And then if we ask others to help us, I think that's what happens. If we live the life and live the model life that some of the individuals recognize, we'll be better off as a real city, and we will be the IT city. We'll have so many people clamoring at the door, we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do. We'll have to annex a couple of those. Oh, I can't say that. But anyway, you get the drift. Thank you for being here. This has been a night of celebrations, of legacies and memories, but it's also a night of new beginnings. So I encourage each of us to figure out what our new beginnings are, to work collaboratively with others. There is work yet to be done. Thank you for being here. I'm going to call Brian Fessler up, who will end with the unity prayer. Thank you, Brian.
Let us pray. On this day, God, I would just like to say thank you. Thank you for those who have represented your work here tonight. Thank you for those who have come before us and paved the way. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to create a very bright future. I pray for strength to carry out your work, the wisdom to work together and get along, and to know the truth when we see it, and the courage to act. May we always make you proud, and I pray that you help us create a city where human rights is a fact and not an idealistic dream. And all God's children say, amen. Thank you for coming. Go in peace.
Thank you.